Welcome to this week's episode of Pondering Play and Therapy with me, Philippa.
And me, Julie. And this week, our topic is siblings and many different angles thinking about siblings. Philippa, you and I both have siblings. I've got 4. How many have you got?
So I've got full sibling, a brother, and I've got a stepsister.
So you grew up with those siblings?
With my brother, I did. My stepsister, she was in her teenage years and I'd left home. So it was a different relationship.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
today, we want to think about something to do with the relationship between siblings, what happens between siblings, and we'll draw on our own experiences for that. And I'm sure there'll be listeners who have siblings, perhaps who had siblings that are no longer with us, or grew up as only children, and to think what it's like for each of us working with families that have several children, and what goes on between those children that might bring, often it's one child who comes to therapy and the others don't. And I'm really curious to think about that.
And I suppose also there's the bits where siblings come together, maybe not in a blended family, but in a fostered family, in an adoptive family, or with grandparents who maybe have their own children still at home, but then also care for grandchildren for some reason. So again, those siblings, but they're not siblings, are they? And all that, those eclectic mix of families, I think, is
siblings that we live with and siblings who live in other households, but we are related to. Yeah, there's so many different ways that siblinghood, if that's such a word, can exist. So we're going to be pondering all of that today. And I'm thinking about my siblings. I was the 4th out of 5, and we came in quite quick succession. So when I was born, my very oldest sibling was just 5. So my mother had 4 children under the age of 5, which I think must have been pretty tough. And it's that sense of, and I've heard other people talk about this, I don't know if there's any research about it, but how my sense of myself as that little one born into already 3 other children at home, finding my place, finding how I might slot in, finding how I get my needs met, when there were already 3 very young children also getting their needs met. And then quite a few years later, there was a 5th born. And I think perhaps that was my younger brother. He didn't have so much of having to think about, where do I fit in? What's my role? And sometimes we think about, what is our sense of self? Some people call it the internal working model, or your conditions of worth. What are the things that brought me to the attention of the adults who were keeping me safe? And I think I've done it, like lots of therapists, have done lots of thinking about that over the years. And that one of my ways of fitting in or finding my place in that quite busy household was to be the good girl, because that role wasn't yet taken. Being the good girl, being the pleaser, the helper, the always doing things right. But on reflection now, many years later, thinking that was actually quite hard work to always try and get things right. I was never told off. I would do naughty things and I would break things and I would do all the things that lots of children do. But somehow my parents didn't see me as the one that might have done that. So I know, and very sorry to my siblings, you often got told off for things that I had done and I never admitted to them. So there was never a sense that, oh, Julie might have done that. Well, that's typical of Julie. What was typical of Julie is, she's the nice one. She's the good one. Hasn't got the brains of the others. She's the nice one. And I have spent a lot of my life since then trying not to be the nice one and actually allowing other parts of myself to come out. But I wonder for you, Philippa, what was with you and your brother and later in life, your stepsister, what was your role? Were you given a role? Did you find a role?
I
Or
don't.
is that not something that exists for you?
Yeah, I was the oldest. My brother is younger than me. And he was the most irritating thing in the world, I think, for periods of my childhood. And my mum used to just say, just ignore him. I'd be like, I can't ignore him. He's hitting me around the head. Like, not hard and hurting me, but that irritating, like, tapping on either side of. So it irritated me. And I'd be shouting, Mom, and she'd say, just ignore him. And Mum'd be like, I can't ignore him. He's. Anyway, and he would be laughing about that and winding me up. Now, my role is of the eldest, really, is what I would say, is that I organize our family. I look after everything goes through me most of the time, one way or another. And as he grew, as we grew, we that was a role we took, and he's significantly important to me.
Mm.
And our dad died when we were in our teenage years, and I think that created a really strong bond, but also a divide for a period of time. So there was a bit in our like teenage years. He was only 13 at the time, so that's really young.
Mm.
And I remember going to get him from school to tell him.
Oh,
My
Philippa.
grandparents driving us, and I had to go and get him out of class to tell him. And I remember that role and that responsibility, and how I was laughing at the time, but because I was like now, when I look back, I was so anxious and so overwhelmed by that. And then that created a divide. We managed our grief in very different ways. And I left, really. I checked out of our family for a little bit because that was the only way that I could really manage those sorts of things. But he still remained exceptionally, present in my life, even though he wasn't present in my life. Does that make sense? But over the years, we thankfully have found our way back to one another. And he still drives me crazy, Julie. He still irritates me. I still want to punch his head in most days. But I couldn't. I love him and he's thankfully I've got a sister-in-law that I really adore, and she's become part of that relationship now, and I've got two nieces from them. And yeah, but I still, if he will ring and say, can you just tell me this, or what about this? And so I'm still in that role, but there was a bit, I think, where I couldn't fulfill that role because I was in my own grief. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
And the
that's
way that I managed
interesting.
it, yeah.
Yeah, so our roles continue perhaps through adulthood and around big life events. Like my parents both died as elderly parents in the last couple of years, and seeing how those events, those events of caring for elderly parents and taking them to appointments and then arranging funerals and arranging the sale of the house and all the things that go on, and many people will have had those experiences, how that actually brought us together, the five of us. And they don't all live in this country, but the five of us finding ways of being together and talking a lot about past experiences as children. And what I've been astonished by is my story about an event that happens. I'll remember back an event for when, say, I was 8. And then my siblings go, oh, yeah, I remember that day. And this happened and that happened. I think, but that's completely different to how I remember it. And really realizing, having even grown up in the same household as with 4 other children, our experiences of that have been so immensely different. What we've taken from it, what we remember, how it's lived on in us since then. I find that astonishing. And it's not that there's just a slight difference in the way we remember it, it's completely different. And I'm thinking about the children that I work with, many of whom are siblings. They live with some siblings, or they know that they have siblings that perhaps they've never lived with, or are about to be reunited with, or maybe it's a blended family and other siblings are going to join them in the household. They are laying down those layers of stories and memories and bring those into the therapy room. And I'd be very curious to talk to them as adults. What do you remember of your relationship with that sibling?
I wonder if just that play, and that play and that playfulness gives you those foundations and those bits of belonging to your sibling. Because with my brother, particularly because we were children, we did do lots of play. Yes, he irritated me, he drove me crazy in those, but we played outside, we played in the house, we played together, and we now still remember. Can you remember, like you, can you remember when we went and got the dinghy on there? And yes, there's different versions because we were different ages, or holidays that we did. Can you remember that was the best holiday we had? Or there's one holiday where I think it was the worst in the world, and he's like, I didn't experience it like that, but I was just hitting those teenage years and he wasn't quite there. And but those lay your sense of belonging, your sense of connection, your sense of we're in this together. So even though for me and my brother, there was I needed to pull away, we'd got all this belonging, all this history, all this that kept us connected all the way through that trickiness. And eventually we find our way back to being siblings and being in one another's lives and exceptionally important. But I wonder what it's like if that playfulness is not as rich, because children will still find a way to play. We've talked about that in past podcasts, but I wonder if what it's like to live in a house where you have got siblings, but you're in competition with your siblings, or which I think is what you were saying, or siblings that you've come and gone and come and gone, and that richness, or it's a different kind of connection. I wonder what that is like.
And also thinking about when I talk to friends about family and siblings, and I happen to be in a family unit where the five of us are still very much in touch and choose to spend time together. They are the people I would most go to if I needed something. But I also know many people who are not in touch with their siblings and have chosen, or it has fallen out, that they cannot be in touch with them, or their sibling has died or has had some illness that causes them not to be able to communicate in ways that they have done. And I can sense the pain of friends when I say, oh, I've just spent the weekend with one of my brothers and we did this and we did that. And they go, oh, my brother would never think of doing that with me. But I can hear the regret or the sense of longing in that. And I wonder if that's a sort of longing for how things have been. I would say when I was growing up in that family, I just remember this tremendous physical fights. I was a girl surrounded by lots and lots of boys, and I could hold my own. And I remember those games of being held out on the floor, or sitting on each other, or bending each other's arms, or bending each other's legs. And then you'd be saying, no, get off. No. But then there was the absolute no that kind of said, you're about to really break my arm, or you're about to really do some big damage. And we knew when it got to that stage, we never actually hurt each other. But there was the kind of excitement and the physical tension of that. And I don't remember my parents getting very involved with that. I think they just got used to the sound of us play fighting, but a little bit more. I was able to have those big tensions with the sibling because ultimately I knew it was safe. Ultimately, I knew they were not going to hurt me. And I know for other people in different families that would have it would be very different, and that there might be real hurting. We're still quite physical. And now there could be a bit of jostling, a bit of pushing. It's more that we play with words now, more than with our bodies. And I'm thinking about when I'm seeing families, or it will often be, so most of my work is with doing play therapy, which is generally the way I work, one child and one therapist, and the parent generally isn't in the room. There are some times when the parent is there, but in hearing the story of the family for the referred child, the child that the parents often see as the problem child, I'm always really curious about the other children in the family, often whom I never meet. And I'm curious about why this child is the one that's being brought to play therapy. And I wonder what the conditions of worth, the internal working model of that child is being developed as. Are they the naughty child, the problem child, the child to be fixed? And as I get to know the child in therapy and my warmth and empathy grows for that child, I find myself thinking about the absent child that I'll never meet, the one they're always fighting with, the one they're always controlling, the one they're always, the tales that I hear. I'm really curious to find out about that other child and would love to see that child as well. And sometimes that does work out. Sometimes I do end up seeing both children either simultaneously, or I'll do a block with one child and then a block with another child. But I'm interested primarily in the relationship, because often that's part of the referral. You know, I'd like to bring our child to play therapy because they're not getting on with their sister, because they're always biting, because they're always stealing, and it's all to do with what's happening with the sibling. So I'm really curious to meet all of them if I can. I don't know, do you ever work with siblings or with one and then the other? How's that worked for you?
Yeah, so I work with, quite a few siblings really. So sometimes I'll work with them separately but concurrently. So I'll see one sibling one week and the other sibling the other week, but not together. Sometimes, like, I might then see them together, like in holidays or stuff like that, just so that they have the experience of being together in a space. Sometimes I will see a sibling and maybe a colleague of mine, or be seeing somebody else if it's not therapy or bus or whatever they need. It might be if they need play therapy or drama therapy or something like that. So yeah, I work with quite a few siblings, and often it's this, I guess, what would be termed a trauma bond. It's that thing of that they are fighting, they're arguing, they're hurting one another more than typically developing children, more often than typically developing children, because like you say, all siblings, all that's very generic, but I would say in my experience 90% of siblings have arguments, spats, disagreements. Sometimes it might be words, sometimes it might be physical, sometimes it might be no words, but I'm taking my ball away and you're not playing anymore. But there's conflict, isn't there, between, because you're negotiating life, you're negotiating where you are, and that is part of growth and development and understanding how you get your voice heard within relationships, within families. And a good way of testing that out is with your sibling, isn't it? If you can argue with your sibling where you're safe and and it's trusted, then actually as you become older, you can take that out of the house and So there are developmental expectations, I suppose, that within families we do these things. Often siblings that come for that, to me, have got more than. It's more than they. It's very regularly. It's over. Parents often feel it's over most things rather than just a small thing that they're significantly hurting one another, and they don't have that internal thing that you were talking about that says, okay, I've gone far enough now. It's I need to go further. And there's a jealousy or a competition between this child, my siblings having more of my parents' attention than I will. And so that's the relationship. Sarah Dillon talks about pie, and which I think is a really helpful concept in that if you've got an apple pie and there's one child and two parents, then you've all got a slice of the pie. But then a second sibling comes in, your fear is when you've got that trauma stuff where you haven't experienced that consistent, predictable care, is that you're going to have to give them a piece of your pie. Not that there's enough pie to go around, that you're all going to get an equal slice of the pie, that you're going to have to give somebody some of yours and you're going to get less because of it. And it's that thing of, if the parent is playing with my sibling, they're taking my pie rather than there's enough pie for everybody to have. And I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about it, because I guess for typically developing families, of course there's jealousy in that, but generally that internal working model that you talked about helps us understand that there's enough pie for everybody and it's never going to run out. Sometimes when you've experienced trauma, neglect, childhood adversity, you don't hold that, do you, inside, that there's enough pie? Because in times there literally hasn't been. You haven't had enough food. You haven't had enough love. You've been ignored. So they've literally learned that there isn't enough pie. And so the conflict comes between that, you're taking my very essence of what I need to survive. And that, I think, is hard for everybody in the family.
Yeah, that is sense of the pie can keep getting bigger to accommodate whoever's in the household or whoever is in need of attention. But yeah, for many children, that the pie remains quite small and limited, and so any part that goes to somebody else is a threat. So we have that concept for children perhaps who've experienced adversity, either within their own household or within previous households, if they've moved into foster care or moved into living with other relatives or adoption. But there's also, when I think about trauma bond, and it's a term I know, but I have to say I haven't looked into for a long while. There'll be other people far more experienced than me to know what this particularly means. But this sense of, I'm thinking about two siblings, but of course it could be many more, who have experienced something adverse together. So a bit like you saying you and your brother experienced the early loss of your father, and you were at different ages, but that was a common experience, but you experienced it very differently. Also, children who have witnessed something, witnessed an accident, witnessed a fire, witnessed a huge fight or domestic violence in their household. There is, in my experience of working with siblings, is often that has bonded them, but in a really, literally a sort of sticky way. They have had to be in the cupboard together. They have had to be under the bed together. They've run out together, often an older sibling taking the younger siblings with them. And so they have a bond, but it's not an affectional bond. It's a bond over that common experience of deep fear, especially if that fear is related to their parents being in an unsafe situation. And, you know, I was hearing about a situation the other day of a child who witnessed his father attacking his mother and holding her down, and then the mother asking the child to bite the father to get him off, and other siblings being around in that situation. And my goodness, your heart goes out to everybody in that situation. But this little one kind of in some way bonded with siblings and mother over this very, very violent, scary situation where one caregiver is hurting the other caregiver. I can't think of anything more adverse than that, when the people keeping you safe are not safe together and are not safe with you. And having worked with many families in foster care and also in adoption, the decision that's sometimes made to separate siblings, it used to be called the together or apart assessment.
I think it still is,
I
together
think
or
it still
apart.
is.
Yeah.
So when there are several siblings in a group who may have come from the same birth family, but have gone to live, often for very practical reasons, in separate foster homes, simply because no foster carer could take them all. And so they've been split.
Julie, can we just go back to the trauma bond just for a minute? Because I suppose one of the other things I was thinking around the trauma bond is we talked about the roles we took with our siblings, and also within households where domestic violence is a really good one. Children can also take roles, can't they, as the protector or the so the older child, it doesn't have to be the older child, but one child might be the protector for one or more, so that when parents are arguing or when a parent comes in drunk and is going to commit violence, they are aware and they're like, okay, come on, now be quiet, and they actually quieten the other children down, or they move them out of the way and they keep them safe, or they feed them and they steal. I've worked with children, certainly as a social worker, where they would steal food from other people's packed lunches to take them home to feed the siblings that were at home, because they know that they aren't going to have any food, so they take that role. But then when you move them into a house where they don't need to do those things, they're still in that role, aren't they? Which I think you're going to go on to, but I just wanted to put that you take roles as siblings in whatever kind of house you live. And sometimes those are adaptive for the situation at the time, but they shouldn't be adaptive really in typical developing houses, because they are things that have stopped you from dying or stopped your siblings from dying. And that can then impact, can't it, when they're moving on to foster families or adoptive families. And I think it can also influence the together and apart assessments, because they're doing an assessment about these children who are controlling. It appears that they're controlling their siblings, they're parenting their siblings, they're hitting and hurting their siblings, but they're actually doing the things that have kept them safe. And then we come along and assess that and say, oh no, they're too controlling, they're not letting them do it, we need to be the parent. And I'm sure there are times, I think sometimes it's understanding why a child is behaving in the way that they are.
And how it has served them and kept them safe and kept them alive. And that's not going to stop immediately when the practical environment is no longer needing that. And I've seen that happen so often, where often and it is often the oldest, because physically more capable sibling at 6 has been caring for 3 younger siblings, including feeding the baby and changing nappies and finding food. In the assessment is often placed, or my experience has been, is often placed separately from the younger siblings. One, because they're 6, they're not likely to be adopted. It's far less likely. So long-term foster care, and also I understand it. It's that sense of how can we help this 6-year-old little one who has become an adult way before their years. They're in that parentified role, to give them the opportunity to be little, to be 6, to be playful, to be loved and have their needs taken care of. Because if they're placed with the younger siblings, the thought often I've seen in meetings is that they will continue in that role, and the new parents, the foster carers, adopters, won't get a chance to do that with the younger siblings. And it's tragic and it's complicated. And sometimes I've seen situations where that older sibling, the 6-year-old, is placed in foster care, the 3 younger siblings placed in adoptive families, and they no longer have contact. And that is then adding huge loss and bereavement into already a very complex
And the children
situation.
don't stop being in that parentified role if they're not together. The 6-year-old is still in that parentified role, just like we are still parents. You still think about those kids. Are they safe? Are they okay? What they're doing? But you're just adding to that anxiety. And this is not saying that children shouldn't be separated from the siblings, but I think that it's a much more complex issue, because often I will work with children and that is one of their biggest fears is, what is the house like that my siblings are in? Are the parents the same as the parents I was with? Are they got a bed to sleep in? Are they getting enough? Because they don't know. And they're living with that fear of them not being. And the children that are not with the older one that was looking after them can often think, well, I'm not going to be safe because my siblings not here, because they're not there to tell me what to do. And yes, as professionals, as adults, we want them to be able to experience childhood, but we can't just assume because we put them in a separate situation they're going to experience childhood, because they're not. They're still in this situation, in their bodies, in their brain, and they've still got that bond with their sibling. And the other thing that children, it makes me smile, but it's also very sad. They often know that they're doing these things. So I've worked with children who'll say, I know my mum used to put out the clothes for my sister to get dressed in, and I'd just put them all back away and put something else out again. Or I know my sister was going to go and wanted to go and sit on that chair, but I wasn't going to let her. I was going to sit on that chair. And so that they often know that they're doing these things, and so we say, stop doing it, and they internalize it as though that's because I'm doing something bad, but they don't really understand why they're doing it. It's then our job, I think, is to unpick with the young person is, what's that about for you? Why was it so important that you got the clothes out for your sister? What did that mean? What was that about? What was that? Rather than just saying, don't do it, I can be the mummy or the daddy, you don't need to. Actually, how do they understand what that means? Do you know what I mean? And we just expect that they can do something different, but their blueprint is still what it is, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
To be the helper, to be the provider, to be the safe one. Yeah. And no matter which household that child may end up in, that compulsion, that pattern, that reason for living is still there. And as you say, no amount of a new parent, adoptive parent, foster carer saying you don't need to do that anymore doesn't make that go away. And I'm curious as well, as I'm saying all this, I'm thinking, I know this is a bit of a shift, but thinking about parents, and I've worked with several parents, both of whom have been lone children, single children in their family. They've grown up as only children. And they have several children together, and they have never experienced the world of siblings for themselves. And I can hear often the kind of shock that siblings fight, that siblings argue, that siblings jostle for attention, because it's not something they have experienced. And I'm and when I'm listening to families talk about what they are perceiving of their children, I'm wondering whether those who were brought up as only children are quite nervous of the sibling relationship just because they haven't experienced it. And the idea that, you know, that there are conflicts and that there are these beautiful bonds as well within that is a whole new experience for those parents. And I've often that has been the work with the parent rather than seeing the children as a problem because they fight and they argue and they're rivalrous, is to work with the parents to reflect on what do you see of siblings? Go and have a look, ask your friends, what was it like growing up as a sibling? I will use the word normal, but I don't think anything is normal. What is more within a sort of typical range? What is something not to be too exercised about? And what is a difficulty, a problem, something that might benefit from some therapy? And it's often in those conversations that the parents will go, oh, is that what really happens with siblings? I go, could be. And that sense of if you haven't experienced being in a sibling group, what is your understanding of working with or being the parent then of siblings? I suppose it's the same about any experience we have as therapists, social workers, helpers. If I haven't experienced childhood bereavement, can I wonder what that's like for this child? So it's helping parents to wonder what this is like for their children. And it might not be as awful or as damaging as they're experiencing it as.
Mm.
And it could be, but it's just another angle that I sometimes take. Philippa, going back to what you said earlier when you were saying about how you might work with siblings, that sometimes you might see one week and the other one the week, or another worker or other workers in your organization might see a sibling at the same time. How do you decide that? How do you work out that plan? Say you've got a family with several children in it, and there's a sense that there is a need for all of these children. How, with your associates, do you come to that plan?
I
Or is
mean,
it sometimes
yeah.
just given to you?
Sometimes I see families with 3 or 4 children, and I see all the children at different points in the week or the month. And so I think with therapy, it's easy because we do a MIM, don't we? We do a Maastricht interaction method assessment. That really gives you a lot of information. And maybe we really need to talk a little bit more about therapy or have somebody on a therapy. Because actually, that I often use a MIM even when I'm not going to do therapy. Oh, therapy, when I'm not going to do therapy, sorry.
Yes.
Because I think you just get a lot of information about the family dynamics, about the children, about everything. And you can do the advanced MIM. Sarah Solo does it so I sometimes do a family MIM. So sometimes I do dyadic MIMs and a family MIM sometimes. So then you see the whole family together. So you see with just a dyadic MIM, it's a parent and a child, often 2 parents, and take it in turns, and then the child. But with a family MIM, you can see the whole family together. So I think that for me, is often the starting point, even if I'm not going to go on to do therapy, because then I can think about, is this what it looks like in your family? Is this, because often conceptualization and families might say always happens, or it never happens, or those wide, because that's what it feels like. And that's not just me. It feels like your kid is always swearing or but when you can spend some time, and often I do a little bit of free play before I do a mim. So I might give them some Play-Doh or some drawings and say, just have 10 or 15 minutes just to relax them in. So you can see a bit of free play because the mim is quite structured, isn't it? Then I will often then just use that and think about with the family, is this what your family looks like? Is this what typically, I know we're doing atypical things, but is this how your interactions are? And then can start to think about what are your goals from that? Because I think with any therapy you're going to do, what is the goals? What is the help? And I would be honest and say the sibling relationship isn't going to be the goal, because the sibling relationship is a result of unmet needs in your children in some way. If they are worrying that they aren't getting enough attention, if they are worrying you're not going to meet their need because you're sitting with their sibling, playing together with the sibling and having a nice time is not going to meet that need. What we need to do is build that relationship, that sense of felt safety within the adult relationship so that they don't feel threatened by their sibling. Then we can move on to the sibling. It's not that we won't address the sibling, but the first bit for me has to be that foundation of how do we help the child feel secure enough, trusted enough, that my adult, my big person, is always aware of me, even when they are feeding my baby brother or they're bathing my sister or they're out at work, whatever it is. How do that holding in mind, so that very basic stuff. But so that's how that we do. So we think about that, and then it's thinking about which. So if I was doing therapy, I might do dad with one sibling, mum with another sibling every other week, and then swap them over so that each child gets each bit with them. But that's how I would start, is just really trying to understand the family and thinking about what is the needs and being realistic, because changing sibling relationships, it is very hard. In my view, it's about the individuals that then come together. So I then might do it just in the summer holidays or Easter holidays. I might just get them all in together just so we can have those moments where there's play and fun and again use therapy games and things like that. So you can then work with the families and say there are moments where we can have these things, but it's very structured, it's very contained, it's very, so you can bring those little bits of hope in. But my view would be, certainly when I'm working with family where it's really outside of that atypical sibling relationship, it's the siblings' needs that we meet first. I might link it. I might say, oh my gosh, this time Julie, I hear you were playing with. If I was doing a better DDP work or something like that. But primarily, yeah. So it would be understanding the family. And for me, the MIM and that assessment is the best way to do it.
Yeah, Philippa, that's really rich, and thinking about how that's funded, how brave that sounds in some ways, because often I will get a referral for one child for play therapy, and there isn't funding to do a family assessment, or there isn't funding to meet the other siblings or do some play with both of them, three of them, four of them together, get a sense of that they're not my client. And so I think there's a lot to be thought about in the referral routes and the funding routes. And yeah, it's making me think about all my clients, past and present, actually, and how often I have focused on one child, even though I know a big part of the referral reason has been conflict with a sibling. And I have worked with siblings together. I've worked with twins. I've seen one, and then the next hour I've seen the other. And actually that worked really well because they were aware of each other. And one parent came in with one child. This was life story and play therapy together. One parent came in with one of the twins, and the other parent came in with the other twin. And then they spent the other hour with the twin that they'd just been, the child they'd just been with. And then towards the end of that intervention, we had everybody in together. And I think that was a really helpful intervention for that whole family, for each of the parents as well as each of the children. But I've also done, and in fact, I've got several families where I'm doing this at the moment. I've worked with one sibling, say a year ago or even 2 years ago, and I've said goodbye and we've had an ending. And then a little while later, the sibling, younger or older, I've worked with both, comes in. And what the parents have very respectfully done, and I've asked them to do this, but they've also thought of it themselves, is check in with the first child who's already had their therapy, or we've come to an end. How would you feel if Julie also saw your big brother? How would that feel? And actually, they've always said, yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. I think they need to. Sometimes children will refer their siblings. It's like, I know I'm ending and I know, yeah, but could you see my little brother as well? Because he really needs this. So I sometimes have referrals from the sibling or the cousin. I've had cousins refer each other. And then as parents and adults, we've thought about that. But I'm really curious then, because when I then meet with the second or third sibling, I've already got a relationship from several years ago with the other sibling. And when they say, oh, my little sister does this, or my big brother does this, I know that child a little bit. And I occasionally then get all of the siblings together. It's usually been 2, occasionally it's been 3. But I've done that in a much more directive way. Generally, I work in quite a non-directive way. But when I have all the siblings together, then it would be something that we've all agreed and we've all planned, and it's a task. It's something we're going to do together. And I'm thinking back to what you're saying about the MIM doing an MIM at the beginning. I'd be really interested in doing. I've not done a sibling MIM before. I've done separate siblings, but I've not done 2 siblings in the room together.
Yeah,
so
a family MIM.
A family MIM. I'd be interested to think about that. But I have done let's play some games together and let's do a task together. And one of those tasks is inviting the whole family to create a picture of their family as animals and give it
I do that one as well.
Do you do that one as well? Probably we've been on the same training at some point.
Yes.
And either I'm in the room as that happens, or if I've got consent and it's kind of part of what we're doing, I might video it and be in another room and watch it back later. Because I find watching it with the family later can be really helpful.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about how families go about that task. There's the families where everybody gets their own piece of paper and draws their own drawing, or 2 pair up and do one together. The families where one person sits to the side and 1 or 2 of the family members do everything. There's others where one completely takes charge of the whole activity, does all the drawings for everybody, names everything, and it's on one piece of paper. It's fascinating just watching that task, watching some of the dynamics. And I think from the MIM, our MIM training, and what you spoke about earlier, it's really important to ask the family afterwards, is that how things normally go?
Yeah.
Because it might be that's not how things normally go. And I might be drawing conclusions and getting my formulation from something that isn't real. Sometimes families will say, oh, we would never do something like that, or it would never go like that, or I think we're all a bit nervous and so it went a bit weird, but normally we would do something like that in a completely different way. And I think that's really helpful to have the narrative that goes alongside the practical task.
Absolutely.
And then sharing with it's usually with the adults, and I certainly mainly work with quite young children, but to show them little clips of that and just ask for their thoughts about, oh, what was going on for you at that moment? What might have been going on for your child at that moment? And getting a sense of how the parent thinks about the child and thinks about and conceptualizes their children's relationship. And I find that really interesting if there are two parents, how I might hear two quite different threads. Oh, I thought he was doing that because, or I thought that was rather lovely what he did there. Oh no, that really annoyed me when he did that. And that's the sort of thing that really bugs me every week. Then that opens up a conversation for the parents in a held, contained way to be able to express their very different views of their children and how that might be feeding into what's happening between the siblings. So that simple task of draw a picture of your family as animals and give it a title. And I'll come back in when you're finished. That's the instructions. But I think it generates so much discussion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another, it just made me think that there's another sibling work that I've done around life story work with siblings together, but not doing particularly the really tricky bits, but looking at birthdays and holidays, working in the present and helping them to go as far back into the past that they want. Or so looking at the fun times. We're going to get onto the tricky times at some point, but and the tricky times probably are going to be done individually, but doing the kind of the family story of where they are now, of what they like, of what they remember, so that you're building that connection to the present and to the people in the present and trying to help to strengthen that before we go back into the past where maybe there was more trauma, where there was maybe more friction. Does that make sense? So thinking about, show me the best holidays, let's look at your birthday pictures, let's look at things that you've found funny. And nowadays everyone's got so much on their phone, they can just email it to you, and I will often print them out and we do it like with life story work on a very big sheet, but all the things that the siblings want to share, want to show me, so that you can then begin to think, probably individually, tell me a bit more about when it's tricky with your brother, or when in your past and your sister was looking after you, because you started with this great foundation of, these are all the great things that we do together. This, can you remember when, oh, I remember when you did that, or when you wore that, or, and so you've got this foundation to keep checking back with. And I think that's been, yeah, some of the nice, because we often think we have to work in trauma with them, but sometimes you don't. We can just do the nice, not, and I don't mean to dismiss everything, but it's the things that they feel are positive, they feel are the fun and the engaging and the connecting things around what they've done, restaurants that they've eaten, and when they've tried new things. It's their stories about them together in a way that, yeah, builds those positive connecting memories.
And that they've got a safe concept of play or togetherness to come back to when it gets into some of the trauma work and the touching on those really tricky, very early memories, often for our children that we work with. It's knowing that they've still got a foot back in the present and in reality of the present, and that there are good things within that as well. And it's sometimes having a foot in each camp, but knowing that the child can safely come back. So that's how I used to do life story work, is we would do some play, then we'd literally roll out the timeline and, as you say, kind of work backwards from the present, and then have a snack. It had a very different feel to it. We would get some old photographs out and think about some of those very tricky moments from very early on, and then it was usually only just 10 or 15 minutes. And then I had a child who'd say, roll it up, like, I've done enough of that today. I've hit my limit. Let's get back to some play. And it would often then be role play about processing some of those feelings that were around some of the facts that they wanted to know about but didn't want to know about.
Yeah, and I think doing it with a sibling, it helps them to see how the sibling saw them in the moment, because often they can get into that really negative. We know that trauma affects the brain. We know it affects how we have our reward system and all those sorts of things. So we often can get stuck on the, yeah, but you didn't let me go swimming with you, or yeah, you didn't let me. You can get stuck in that negative moment. But when you bring it out and they can hear their siblings say, but I remember when, it starts to also challenge some of those things around. But they only see me as an irritant. They don't want to play with me. They don't see me as fun. And when they can construct something that's relatively safe together and share those memories, because you said at the beginning, you have different memories, you have different experiences,
Absolutely.
and then when you can construct it together and construct it in a way that feels positive and safe for you, that starts then to help that relationship bond in a different way, that actually they do see me differently. They did want to look after me. They did those kind of things. And I think that can be really helpful. Obviously, you need siblings who can hold those times. There are siblings that I work with that I don't think would be able to do that at this stage. But you hope that, that they can hold some of those positive experiences, that they've got the cognitions to be able to hold it and feel it. Because that's the other thing, is you want them to know it and be it, don't you? It's the knowing and the being. You want those two to connect together if we're going to start to change that internal working model. And so there are, I think, parameters around doing that work, but I think you definitely can.
Yeah. And I think there can be a real gift in working with siblings together or alongside each other, as you said, concurrently. And then the relationship with say me as the play therapist can sometimes echo the relationship with the parent, and I need to take account of whether one sibling may become very protective or jealous of me if I'm seeing the other sibling, and being open about that, being congruent about that. Yes, I'm seeing you between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock. And then I'm going to see your big brother between 4:30 and 5:30. And I don't tell him things that you've been playing, but it's and vice versa. But if you and he want to talk about the therapy that you're each having, that's absolutely fine. When children come in and say, but did he play with the puppet? Did he do this? I say, oh, you're really curious about that. And I know, but that's something that I'll keep private. But of course, you can ask him yourself.
Yeah, I think that's tricky, isn't it? Because often with it, and I am lucky. I see siblings in different rooms. We've got more than one room, so we've got two playrooms. So I will, when there's three, it's a bit harder, but I try and see them in different rooms so they have different experiences, and they might come and say, yes, but I want to do the tug of war like such and such did last week, and that's hard. And I'll say, I know that you really do, and maybe at some point you will, but my job right now is to just be with you and do what you need. And you don't need tug of war right now, so we're going to do what you need, aren't we? And because it is that, why did they get to play Floor is Lava and you've played May I with me and I want to play? And that, you can feel that competition starting to come in the therapy.
Which is helpful to have the real situation that's happening with with parents in the room, even though I'm not the parent, but in some ways I'm taking that role a little bit with the child and then it's live, it's dynamic, it's in the room, and I can work with that in a way that sometimes the parent might not be quite ready for that, or it becomes too full of friction immediately with the parent. So the therapy can be an opportunity for a child to practice and test out some of those roles and relationships. But seeing siblings means that there's that more than curiosity about what's happening with the sibling in the therapy.
And also, it can do that I can have something different and still have as much fun.
Yes, I
Do you
can
know what I
still
mean?
have as
And
much
what,
apple pie.
yeah. And what I tend to do is, again, I'm very privileged in the way that I work, and we have little drink cartons and things, and we give them things. So I will often let them take a drink for their sibling. So they, at the end, they get a drink in the session, but at the end, when they leave, I will say, you can take, we have Ribena apple juice and orange juice, and I'll say, you can take one for you and take one for whoever the other person is. So they, from their session, are taking something to their session, and then when it's the siblings go, they get to do the same back. So there is still this little bit of a connection, this little bit of, even when Philippa's with my sibling, she's still thinking about me. She's still holding me in my in mind. And if I send Easter cards, I send separate Easter cards, not together Easter cards. I send them in the same envelope so they arrive at absolutely the same time, because I would hate it that one got there and the other was the next day. But so you can do that, I think, when you work with siblings, you can do the holding in the mind and being with one sibling and not the other in a way that is not like being in the house in that moment, is it? Where you're dealing at that moment with both things, and the sibling can see what the other one's doing. Whereas when you're in therapy, they can only imagine it, and then when they're having the conversation, they're both out of it, aren't they? And they're both not receiving it, if that makes sense. Whereas when the conflict is happening in the house, one person is often receiving something that the other feels they're not. And I think that in itself can help to start to change those narratives.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good place to begin to gather this up, but how the therapy relationship, especially if it's the therapy where the relationship with the therapist is a vital part of the intervention of what goes on, can be helping the child in their relationship with their parent and their sibling, especially if the therapist is holding sessions, seeing 2 or 3 siblings in the family, either at different times or concurrently. That sense of the apple pie, and I'm going to think more about that concept, that the pie can keep getting bigger, and I can have a big slice of pie, and so can my sibling. And by then having something, it doesn't diminish what I have. And if they can experience that in their therapy, there's an opportunity for that to be experienced in the family home as well. We could talk forever about siblings, Philippa. There'll be another episode, I'm sure, about siblings. And I've certainly got a lot to think about in my own practice. So thank you for
Yeah,
that this
thank
morning.
you. So thanks for listening to Pondering Play and Therapy. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a comment. We really value your engagement, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.